Jennifer is a personal friend of mine,
Yes.
and my speaker today canceled, and she's pinch hitting for me, so I really appreciate it. But what I love best is Jim, for example, I've known for 7 years, maybe. We rarely speak. This is the first time he's appearing on one of these calls personally. He has one of his minions show up for him from time to time, but Jim's actually here today. And what I love is that your topic is not what we typically have, and I have some people who don't typically show.
Oh, well, there we go.
So that's kind of the notion of this group. Anything that touches the industry remotely, I'd like to touch at some point. So some weeks are going to have the, oh, everyone needs to know about this ISO certification thing. And some people will self-select and say, oh, testing modules, and how to do that properly and make sure that I get the right data that's clinically viable for a value analysis committee to say, okay, or a payer to say, yes, I will cover that. So I'm really grateful for that. Jim, how are you?
Doing very well, Joe, and yourself?
I'm doing well, thanks. So what's up with your business? Give us a quick update. Tell the folks at home what you do.
Sure. I'm the president of LKC Technology. We're a medical device manufacturer. We manufacture ophthalmic testing devices that use visual electrophysiology to test the function of the retina. And it's like giving the eye an EKG. You flash light into the eye, and when light hits the retina responds with an electrical response to that flash of light. And depending on how frequently you flash it, whether the eye's light adapted or dark adapted, you get an idea of the function of the various cellular layers of the retina. So it's very useful in diabetic retinopathy and glaucoma and vein occlusions and a number of different eye diseases. And so we've been at this for a very long time. We have a handheld device that's kind of reinvented the market, and we sell it to countries all around the world. I mean, the devices are approved in Korea and China and Australia and Japan, Canada, US, all through the EU with CE marks, and Middle East and Latin America. And so we're a small company. We're not a big company, but we have a big footprint. I call us the 1,000-ounce gorilla, in our market space. So I see these all the time, and I decided to join a few, and so I'm very interested. I know Joe attended one of his events down in Tampa, I think it was, or whatever it was.
That I usually I forget sometimes, because it's the only one that I did that was marketing focused.
Right, and so
back when you and I were children.
Yes, that's true. We were born at an early age too, I think, Joe. So I'm just interested in various topics of medical device industry. It's an interesting time for all of us in this, and so I find it interesting.
Thank you, Jim. I'll go ahead and put you in the gallery. And
nice to meet you.
Good to meet you as well.
We'll have other guest stars pop in and out.
Fantastic.
Now, I don't think given that you are pinch hitting last minute for me, I don't imagine you have any slides, and you have taken yourself off camera.
Yeah, just give me a second. Vamp for a minute for me. I know you can do that.
Help for you. Ladies and gentlemen, you can put yourself on camera while you do it. We don't care if your camera's bouncing around.
Okay.
Dr. McCabe, trying to get comfortable.
I'm trying to get comfortable.
Dr. McCabe is an academic. You are going up for tenure at Western Washington University.
I am.
And you also run a research center.
I do.
Tell the folks at home about your research center. What kind of research?
Sure. Yeah, so my research is in the just sort of broad domain of clinical health psychology. So a lot of the work I do has to do with family health and just in general improving conditions through psychological treatments. I also do work with psychiatrists who do pharmacotherapy for family health. And so really just trying to improve outcomes for children and families in Whatcom County.
And so we're going to talk today about testing.
Yes, we are.
So you have a background in statistics as well.
I do. So one of the, so I have a background in research methodology and statistics. My position is actually a professor of applied research methods. And so what in attempting to think of something that might be relevant to your group here today, I was thinking about a course that I teach related to research methods and how to really test whether or not, like how we can really feel confident when we say that A causes B, or in the case of your folks here, whether or not the medical device is actually causing what we say it's causing, or having the consequence that we say it is, rather than other factors. Because we too often, just because of the bias of the human mind, we too often lean on intuition, or we lean on our own experiences, but those experiences and our intuition are so biased that we really have to make sure that we're carefully considering several other variables. So maybe something I say today will be relevant, and if it's not, Joe will like maybe massage it to make it seem a little bit relevant.
Well, here's a relevant thing, because when we talked, I was like, well, I'm thinking that most things, you mentioned a placebo when we were preparing, and I thought, well, a placebo is like taking a sugar pill, and so that's pharma, that's not medical. What would be a Band-Aid that doesn't work? But then we realized that, and I'm an overshare, as you know, I have a history of depression and anxiety in the family, and I've got that gene. And at one point, years back, I tried a transcranial magnetic stimulation system. So they put a medical device on my head and they applied electricity to, I don't know, jolt me back into happy. I don't know exactly how it works. And that would be, they could have just gone, and I could have left and like, yeah, I just had my treatment, I feel better. So how would you, if you could take that as an example, I know we're kind of riffing here, but how could, you go into that psychologist's office and say, this works and here's irrefutable proof, because we're talking about the brain, and maybe there's you can see that this part of Joe's head lit up or whatever, and that's, but how do you?
Yeah, I mean, so what you're referring to, and this is an example of something, it's so often that when Joe and I are chatting, that even though it seems like we are in very, very different like areas of, well, he's in, business and marketing, and I'm an academic in psychology. We are like constantly, like words out of his mouth are like, I'm regularly thinking like, oh, well, we talk about that in psychology, and we have to consider those exact same factors in psychology. We talk about them in a different way, but we have to think about those sorts of things.
You attended Gunter's session a few weeks ago, and
he
was talking about neuromarketing. You were like, oh my God, I even mentioned you on it.
Yes. Yeah.
A friend of mine so I need to put you in touch with him.
Yeah, no, yeah, it was fantastic. What a brilliant speaker, and yeah, very relevant to the work that I do. So to go back to what you're making me sort of randomly talk about at the beginning of today's presentation, is basically you're talking about like the existence of the placebo effect, which we hear about all the time, and folks talk about the placebo effect as though it's some folks will talk about it as though it's not a real thing, or it's not important, or that it's really problematic. And so there are a couple of things I'll mention about the placebo effect. First, what it is, what it really is. The placebo effect is essentially the consequence of like a human experiencing a treatment, a therapy, and that's broadly conceptualized, right? It can be a drug, it can be brain stimulation, it can be sitting down and talking with someone, right? Like when we do therapy, psychological treatments, a placebo therapy could be just sitting down and talking with someone who has no training in mental health. Okay. And what we often will see is that folks will improve. The placebo effect is a very real, very real phenomenon, and is what we call a threat to the validity of a causal claim. And so we cannot say that A causes B. We cannot say that your brain stimulation actually improved your depressive symptoms if we have nothing to compare it to. Because for all we know, you are feeling better because you went into a doctor's office and someone in a white lab coat stimulated your mind. And because of the power, the beauty of the human condition, but also kind of how often it can screw us over, your mind could just tell you you're doing better. And it may have nothing to do with that device that was just put onto your head.
I brought Andre on because first I needed you to meet Andre. He's the only one who shows up in a tie. And second, because he left a comment as you began to speak about some of the work that you do. He's in contract manufacturing. Andre, why don't you tell her what you wrote me?
Yeah, so when we design and we designing a therapeutic electronic medical device, Jennifer, what you bring up is a very important point, because we spend a lot of engineering time creating a sham or placebo device that will look, perform, sound, and sometimes feel just like the therapeutic. And believe it or not, we spend sometimes more time on that part than the actual therapy device, because we just want to make sure that it does everything it possibly can except for the therapeutic agent. And so we try to eliminate all the variables and bring it down. Now, candidly, in the studies that we've conducted, we obviously go for a high level of statistical significance, but there's always that question of, what part of it created the therapy. And that's why creating that placebo or sham is such an important part of our research and development work with respect to specifically therapeutic medical electronics.
So Andre, pardon me, all I can think about is this one example.
Sure.
That had to do with, did I feel better?
Yeah, well, that's
the devices. Are they all mental, the ones that you've worked on?
No, absolutely not. There's devices that are used for treating musculoskeletal conditions. There's pressure devices, there's vibratory devices, there's infrared devices. So let's take the one that you're talking about specifically, transcranial magnetic stimulation, TCMS. With that one there, they would have to do everything. The device would have to be exactly the same, except that the output would have to be reduced significantly or turned off completely so that there'd be no output. With respect to, let's say, infrared therapy or phototherapies, there would still have to be a red light because the user will see the light, but it has to be at a frequency that is not therapeutic. So it would have to be outside of, let's say, the 660 nanometer or 830 nanometer therapeutic range. So you got to either put it out of that range or just put a little red light so that the user thinks that they're getting the therapy. So it depends on the application and what the modality is, and you got to engineer that. You really have to engineer that sham to get the variables off, so statisticians don't say that your results are clouded.
Now, Jim, if I understood you, your therapy either dilates my pupil or it doesn't. So what kind of sham device could you possibly create?
Well, we in the FDA world, you do functional equivalence, and so we have a cleared device and an uncleared device, and you test with both devices, and you form, functional equivalence, which is how we got cleared. I find this conversation interesting because there are many studies going on around the world utilizing our ocular stimulation device, looking at various mental health conditions. There's a company, we're in a 20-site clinical trial with a company out of Quebec City that's using this technology to try to differentiate between, people with schizophrenia or depression or other diseases so that they can start the right treatment modality, where it's very difficult to know what to start. We have a study going on in Australia on ADHD. We've done a big autism study in between Australia, UCLA, Stanford, Yale, and a group in London on Alzheimer's. So there's just and there have been autism studies. It's just amazing because the retina starts out as brain tissue and it separates off, and so the eye truly is a window into the body, including the brain. And so there's a lot of work being done to try and help this whole process. And rather than just saying, I feel better, to give you some quantitative, response as far as, are you truly doing better rather than just feeling better? So a lot of work going on.
Absolutely. It's fascinating work. I think so. Jim, when you were talking at the beginning of the call about the work that you do, one of my immediate reactions was, do you do guest lectures at universities? Because I teach a class on sensation and perception and vision. And the things you were talking about were just absolutely fascinating to me. And also, sorry, I'm terrible with names. Who did you have hop on here just a second ago? Andre. Yeah. The way that you described the very careful process of developing that comparison condition. I'll say comparison condition, depending on what you're testing, right? Like you have a sham condition, some folks will have a comparison condition, some folks will have the placebo condition, whatever it happens to be. But it really is about just like very carefully saying, we need these two conditions, my device and the other condition have to be identical except for that one special ingredient, so that we can really say it's that one special ingredient that's doing the trick. Absolutely. And so sometimes it does. It's actually like, and I've had this experience before too, where you design like the treatment condition and then you're like, oh gosh, how are we going to do the the sham condition is really hard to figure out. Like, how do we develop it? We spend way more time putting that together. Yeah, I hear you there. Absolutely.
Let's see if I can get my my health economics guy on, because he's the guy you have to fool in order to get paid. He worked for a payer, and I'm going to see if I can get him. Verna, as a fellow academic.
I was going to comment actually on the last startup that I was at. This was a huge problem or challenge, I should say, because we got through it. But if the treatment that you have, like for instance, ours was a coil that went in, so an implant for treating late stage emphysema. And just with these people with late stage emphysema, just going through a sham bronchoscopy was deemed as really just not appropriate because you get exacerbations. So you've got challenges not only in just a sham, but like, okay, is this ethical, appropriate to be doing this to patients when they're going to get for sure no benefit, and you're going to create problems in the sham? Yeah. So we went down a path of where we were going to do that. And then it was like, okay, it's just not appropriate. You had to get approval from the FDA that, listen, we just don't think it's like, okay to do this. They agreed. So there was a whole back and forth on that. And then, okay, fast forward, all of your normal pre-treatments you have to consider, and you have to consider what's psychologically going to happen if people are going to be in a crossover study later on. Because we had people then in our clinical trial, once they knew that they didn't get the treatment, then it was going to be a year later that they could be crossover patients to be able to get the treatment. Those people then do the very best to be able to stay in great shape, okay? Because psychologically, like, they want to get this treatment. So then when they're compared to people or the controls, it was like, oh crap. They've been exercising and doing everything like completely what you want them to do, but they were like really not a great control because psychologically they were like doing everything possible to make it into the crossover study, but they're our control group for the study moving forward. So I thought Jennifer could probably comment or appreciate this whole psychological aspect of how you set up your clinical trial, which to me was like, whoa, there is so much that's not just engineering, that you really have to be very careful about what you incentivize and don't intend to incentivize when you're setting up your clinical trial.
Oh, absolutely. And it's such, I mean, two things that you brought up just like really got my mind going. One are the ethical considerations, because if we were in, you know, like if we were doing some of these studies, like, I don't know, 70 years ago, we know what some of those research studies looked like. And it was easier for them to design their control groups and their placebo conditions because they were not engaging in the most ethical behaviors consistent with ethical standards. And they didn't have any oversight committees to let them know, like, this is not okay for human subjects. But then there's this psychological piece, which is if our subjects are human, right, then there are so many other factors that we have to consider. And if in the case, Verna, that you're describing, in that case, if I were like the reviewer of that paper, or if I were your statistician, or, you know, like your methods consultant that came on later on, I would be like, nope, no, you can't make a causal claim here. You cannot say that your device is doing the work because your control group is not a true control. They are psychologically different than your experimental group. And so I would say absolutely not. The internal validity of your study is threatened drastically by the fact that they are so motivated, which is great, right? Because you want to be like, but they're so motivated and they're doing fantastic. And then I would be like, well, then you do a different study about like how that affects their health. But yeah, such good points. It's difficult. Working with human subjects is really, really challenging.
Yeah. And sometimes you just don't see something until you're in the middle of it. It's like, oh, shoot, and then you're like, why are these people doing so well? So, I mean, as it turned out, it did. We did not get FDA approval. Panel was divided because we didn't have enough statistical significance. Even though we passed our primary endpoint, it was like, we need more data. And in medical device, it's not like a drug company. Oh yeah, it was like, that killed it. It was like, okay, we don't have another $30 million to go do another clinical trial, and like gone.
One of the key aspects there is to make sure that you meet with the FDA ahead of time and get their buy-in that what you're going to do is going to meet the requirements. Because if you don't do that, I guarantee you somebody's going to want to know something different or something more, and it's going to throw you a curve.
Yeah, well, FDA was good.
That happened to people that we've worked with, you know, in clinical trials with our devices, that you better have them on board, that you've got the study powered correctly with the right number of patients, your endpoints are going to prove your point and all the rest of it. And then you have a better chance of that FDA approval at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, the problem is that I think what people don't realize is that we had FDA buy-in on everything. Everything is lined up well. But when you go to panel, you've got like loose cannons there.
Exactly.
And the way panels are set up are with people who don't know pretty much anything about your device, because they're supposed to be unbiased, and they're statisticians, so they're going to poke holes. And so you can have your panel get completely swayed, even though the FDA is going like, well, crap, we really think this is important, we should move ahead. But it is very, very unlikely that FDA is going to go against a panel. So even though you have a vote of, and of course they have to vote on 3 different questions. And so if you have a couple of those as no's, it's pretty unlikely that the FDA, oh, good, Michelle's coming on, she can tell us about this. Oh, pretty background. God, are you an artist, Michelle?
Now, this is John Saul's wife. You know, he's a member of MDG. He's spoken here several times. This is his wife did this piece.
I think it goes with my glasses.
These partnerships.
I know. Now we need to trade. Like, I need to timeshare my painting to you, and you need to timeshare your glasses to me.
Yeah.
We were talking about setting up controls, and well, I know that she's stepped in late. Jen, how would you, in a sentence or two, capture the essence of what we've been talking about?
What we've been talking about just now?
Mm-hmm.
Is Michelle just joining us? You want the We've been talking about how we can't, how difficult it can be to really say that our treatment or our medical device, whatever it is actually leading to or causing the outcome that we say it is, and how very, very carefully and how many different factors we have to consider and rule out so that we can make sure that we can feel confident really saying it's this device leading to the outcome. And we've talked about the placebo effect, et cetera.
Right. Well, and I've got a general rule that the FDA doesn't believe in the transitive property of math. Like, this is not a logical, they don't do the logic math of if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. You have to do the work. You have to show your work too. This is like not the new math. This is like long division, you know? You got to do all the work in between A and B and B and C. And then you might even have to bring in a D and E at some point to convince the FDA. They're not going to just say, oh, yeah, that's obvious that lower cholesterol leads to better outcomes. And it's logical that A can contribute to a healthy lifestyle and lower cholesterol. Therefore, we can claim we lower cholesterol.
What I wanted to ask you, and I invited some recalcitrant manufacturers on this call who've not taken the opportunity to come on camera. Do you have to do this for every class 2 and higher? Do you have to have a side-by-side placebo sham thing to prove that it was your thing that did it, Michelle? I mean, how does it work when you're submitting?
Well, that depends on how your substantial equivalence discussion. And how closely you are in the same principles of operation, technology, claims, performance standards, intended uses you are to your predicate. For sure, this is going to come in like 100% of the time in a de novo. And it just depends on what kind of studies are you having to do to close those gaps in a 510K between you and your predicate device. Especially if you're going to make claims of better than, or faster than, or better outcomes than.
I think you've worked with Mike Dolphin. I've invited him twice on, but he's, well, there's Maya. But would Mike's device, where he's making I would call it a syringe, I guess, to administer drugs to epidural without going too far and hurting the patient, would that require? I can't imagine how that would even work.
Well, we were very careful with his claims for his submission. So where he's going to have to do a study perhaps is on the marketing side, where he is promoting his product for a particular, because you've got what is it going to take to prove to the FDA, which is a whole different set of data than what it's going to take to prove to your market.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I invited Maya because you work with lasers, and your primary customer, I think, is a chiropractor. Is that a primary target for you?
Yeah, chiropractors, physical therapists, acupuncturists, athletic trainers, veterinarians, equine.
And your claim is what? Use my device and what?
Accelerate the natural healing.
Okay. So
should I expand on that?
Well, I guess I'm sure Jen would have a couple of questions about how you do that and how you would prove that. And I'm sure, I don't know, what class device is yours?
Well, it's a class 2 medical device and class 3B laser. So, and yeah, they're FDA cleared, what's that called? 510K. 510K. Yes, sorry. Yes. Yeah. So I mean, in general, laser therapy has been around for more than 50 years now, and there is a ton of research on it that shows that laser therapy has the ability to increase the amount of ATP or energy to the cells, and thereby you're also increasing the blood circulation, reducing pain and inflammation, enhancing the immune system, increasing the formation of collagen tissue. So really, in short, helping the body heal itself faster. So that's what we do. with our
I know
lasers.
that, I know that you're a step removed, that your father started the company some 30 years ago, and you probably weren't
Yeah, almost
involved
40 in 82. Yeah.
So you probably were just a concept at that point and weren't doing a lot of side-by-side testing. Perhaps this formula versus that formula, or this MASH P versus that MASH P. So you might not know what he's done, but do you have any sense if this work was done? Or Michelle, perhaps you're sure that it had to have been done to have made the claims that he does?
Well, it depends on how long he's had his 510Ks.
Oh, if it's before 76.
Yeah, then he probably doesn't, unless he made changes to the device along the way that required a new 510K. And then even then it may or may not.
Yeah, I guess I don't know when we got the 510K. I mean, the company was started in 82, yeah, but in Denmark. So that's where a company is headquartered. That's where I'm from as well. But yeah, I don't know. I don't remember exactly when we got the 510K. But you know, there are other laser, you know, products on the market as well. And so I think our 510K is based on some of the, or not based, I don't know how that works. I don't know like all the details on that end, but it's something like where you can say, well, our laser is somewhat similar to this other laser on the market and will have somewhat similar, I don't know, effects or whatnot. I think that's how it works.
Mm-hmm. And so this is kind of interesting because I had a client that had an ultrasound device that was cleared. It's the one that Christy Brinkley endorses. Oh, I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's for treating ultrasound to treat wrinkles on your face and neck. And they found that it also was effective for plantar fasciitis, to your kind of physical therapy type applications. And the FDA just because viewed the risk profile of the foot different enough from the face and neck that they had to not only they didn't have to do a 510K for the new indication, they had to do a de novo and start all over with their clinical trials because it was a whole different indication, different patient population, you know, different intended use. So that was fascinating. And then right when I jumped on, you know, I heard Jim talking about the importance of talking to the FDA ahead of time. They did. They had some, and unfortunately, they talked to them, then they heard us, and then we did the de novo, but they ignored everything that the FDA said. And they're like, no, Michelle, this is where I came up with my transitive rule of math theory, because they were like, it's going to be so obvious when we turn our data in that it's not going to matter that we didn't follow that pre-sub. And that was 3 years ago. Surely that's not relevant. They're not thinking like that anymore. And it's like, oh, they are. So anyways, my point is they may have had to do some data if they were using the laser for a new indication, new anatomical location, that kind of thing.
Right. I mean, I think on our 510K, it's kind of I would say kind of a broad description of what the laser can be used for. So it's like, you know, temporary relief of minor muscle pain and spasm or something like that, and increasing the blood circulation. So it's pretty broad. It doesn't say you can only use it on, I don't know, a foot, for instance. Like you can, it's pretty broad. I guess that's a good thing. You know,
I'm intrigued because this is not your typical audience. You typically have 20-year-olds learning Psych 101 and research.
Or I'm doing this, but it's like mental health, psychological related treatments. And so, yeah, when you're talking about improving like wrinkles on skin, then I'm like, I feel like I can't weigh in, but I have a follow-up question. Is it Maya? Is that how you pronounce your name?
Yep.
I'm super interested in what is, like, when you're making this claim about the laser, is the outcome or is the claim that it improves sort of like a person's subjective experience of pain, or is there actual like physical, like physiological changes as a result of the laser? Does my question make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I would say it's more like physiological. It actually, I guess it actually happens. It actually does increase the blood circulation and reduces the pain and reduces inflammation. So like, for instance, with a sprained ankle that might normally take about 6 weeks to heal, with laser therapy, you can help it heal in about 1 to 2 weeks. So it's really, sort of speeding up the natural healing and just helping the patient get better faster.
And so then I think about, and again, this is outside my wheelhouse, but these are just sort of like the questions that naturally come to my mind because I can't help but poke holes in everything that I hear.
Sure.
Because it's sort of part of my job. So then I wonder, then I have questions about like, do you have like an actual, like a double blind study where the individuals who are administering the laser don't know whether or not they are administering the true laser treatment or a sham treatment? And then do the patients know what they're getting? Because I'm sort of thinking, I teach a course on the psychology of pain. And I'm just thinking about just how pain is a psychological construct. There is physiology involved, but the psychology just plays so heavily into our pain perceptions that I could imagine that if I were to be in pain and you were to point a laser at me and tell me that it worked, I would be like, yeah, this is super working. I'm up and at 'em again.
That was actually some of the exact feedback that the FDA gave my client, and they refused to take, was the whole double blind sham, this, that, and the other, because they're like, it's unethical if somebody's signing up for a trial and they're in pain to not treat them and get them out of pain if you can.
It's not their business, is it?
But that's a good question. I mean, so our company has not conducted these trials, but there has, in general, over the past 50 years that laser has been around, there's been there's like 7,000 articles or something on laser therapy and or studies, and so some of them are double blind, and some are, well, it's kind of a big mix of, I don't really know all the details on that, but I know some of them are double blind, where they'll have like a sham laser and then, a real laser and kind of compare.
So I guess my question for you, Jen, is how do you make a study so tight that it's irrefutable, that it's a device that made the difference?
Yeah. I mean, so I think one important thing. Say what?
I said, thank you, Maya.
Oh,
sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. I have so many other things come to mind when I think about something that sort of like changes the healing process, but I can put a pin in that for a second. Joe, to answer your question, we have to remember that if we are dealing with humans, if humans are involved at all, we do not get to say without a doubt A causes B, because there are too many human factors that we are not able to control for, and we can't control for, or we can't like remove from the study things that we aren't aware of, but we can come pretty damn close. And so what Andre was saying earlier about like really making sure that you remove all the noise that you can is super critical. Including things like the device that Maya was talking about. We have to think about things like, well, the body does heal on its own. And so how do you, like, what determines, how do you define whether or not your device causes you to heal faster? Like, what does that mean? How do we define that? So it's not just placebo effects coming in, but it's also human factors and even physical factors. Like our bodies do heal. And so how do we say I healed more on this device than that device?
I was just typing, we have a human factors specialist in our group as well. I was hoping I could get her on. She's a new mom, so it's a little harder to catch these days. So with that, I don't know where to go with that. You said basically, as long as we're talking about humans, you can't ever come up with something so conclusive that it's.
Yes. And so I think that, I mean, first I want to acknowledge that it's the folks in this group are dealing with a lot of more things on the biological side of things. And so they can get a lot closer than folks on my end of the spectrum who are doing like purely psychological related work. But it's basically what it is from a statistical standpoint and methodology standpoint, we kind of have like a just sort of giant checklist of things that can interfere with our ability to say A causes B, or that it's my device or my treatment. And it's sort of the job, it's sort of as a scientist, it's our job to poke as many holes in the argument as we can. Like, could this be happening? Since you are doing your study on humans, right? Could it be related to the testing, right? Like, how are you asking them if their pain has improved? Is that a valid instrument to talk about pain? Is there enough wiggle? Is there enough room, enough sensitivity in that instrument to detect a change in pain? What are the attrition rates? Who is dropping out of your study? Are the people who drop out of your study systematically different than the people who stay in your study? Again, if they are different, then you can't say A causes B. You can't say it's your medical device that's making the change. Do you have a double-blind study? If not, if you don't have a double-blind study, then we can't help it. It's part of the human condition to be biased. We just are. And so if you are trying to test your medical device or your treatment, and you know that you are administering it to group A, and you are evaluating whether or not they get better or whether they see improvement, I don't care how hard you try to be objective. Humans are biased. And if we want something to work, or we hypothesize that something works, it will influence our observations. And there are just decades and decades of research to say that's true, which is why we need to have people who have no idea whether or not the group is receiving the treatment. Right? Like, if you're going to have the laser that does nothing and the laser that does something, we need to make sure that whoever's evaluating the patients has no idea who received what laser, because their bias will seep in to the conclusions. And so will the participants, because if the participants know that they're getting a sham,
they could be like, of course it didn't work.
Yeah, it didn't work. And if they're getting the laser, yeah, exactly. And if they're getting the laser, then maybe it didn't work, but they're like, yeah, I think I'm feeling a little bit better.
Okay, so you said, and I really appreciate you having jumped in. I know you don't have a slide to show, but you indicated that there is this list of things that you need to do. Does such a list really exist? Is there some place that, when, assuming that you're not available for hire, I don't know if that's a fair assumption, but, and the kind folks on this call, actually, I want to bring Lee on, have their work done. How can they be sure that the agency or the consultant or research center that they've hired to do their study has thought of everything?
I mean, I don't want to make it sound like there's a secret, there's like a special list that all of us, it's like a special statistician list that we all share. But there are when I teach this class, for example, at university, we talk about how there are 12 threats to the internal validity of your study. There are 12 main categories of things that can happen that would make it so that a statistician or someone at the FDA or someone reviewing your paper could say, no, you can't say it's your treatment because of one of these 12 things. Now, when addressing one of those 12 things, there are certain things you can do. Like, a lot of those sort of threats to the validity of your study are taken care of by having a comparison group. So folks who are going to have like a one group pre-test, post-test trial, that's like a classic really, really bad experiment because you don't have a comparison group, et cetera, et cetera. But Yeah, so when I teach the class, I talk about 12 categories of things that ways that we can poke holes in your experiment, basically.
Okay. Well, maybe we need to sit in on that class. Lee, you're just joining us now. Thank you. Would you tell Dr. McCabe what it is that you're working on? And I'll unmute you if you can mute yourself. There you go.
Thank you. Hi, thank you very much. And I appreciate your perspective on all of this. I don't know why he put me on to speak though.
I put you on because you've got this great big box and how do I know it works? Would you tell her what you're working on?
Okay, well, there's two answers to the question that he asked. The first one is we decided to take a series of off-the-shelf 3D sensors and put them together into an array of 20 sensors in order to take an image of the human body. We take the sensors are used sequentially. It's not 20 at once. It's think of it as a cage with 4 corners, 5 sensors on each corner. And then within 4 seconds, the 20 sensors one at a time take an image, knit it together and give you a 360-degree view of the human body so that we can look at the body posture, shape, shift, tilts, and rotations. We can take out of those, I don't know, 2 to 3 million data points. We reduce that down to about 476 measurements, and then just angles of the body. And then we take those measurements and we can identify about 46 different conditions. Some of them are WHO, World Health Organization diagnostics, such as hip to waist, trunk to leg ratio and hip to waist ratio, which are WHO proven indicators of metabolic disease. A lot of the ones we're doing are just dealing with posture. Our theory is really simple. If your car's misaligned, the tires wear long enough, the bearings wear, knee replacement, hip replacement, lower back and neck, unless you have a trauma, car accident, ladder, or those sorts of things. Most of back pain is the leading disability in the world right now, more than metabolic, cardiac, and cancer combined. But there is no real easy way to distinguish it. There's been a lot of work on pain. Some of it says that the pain is psycho-controlled, as you were talking about. Where people who have really, really nasty MRIs have no pain at all, and people who have exquisite MRIs seem to have a lot of pain. So that how you distinguish that category is really, really hard. But we're looking at person, my preference is to look at person 4 billion and 1 to 7 billion, the people who will never have access to any type of support whatsoever. And we're not touching the human body. We're just looking at it for ease of your purpose. Think about the Xbox controller that your kid may be sitting in front of for 4 hours. We're using one of those in less than a second, 4 seconds total to get an image. And we had a really interesting, this is the last sentence, so I don't take Joe's window of time here. We had a very interesting thing, a very, very large retailer about 3 years ago. They've gotten over it, but it was a very expensive delay. Their FDA lawyers, the regulatory lawyers, wanted to know, well, how, is this thing FDA approved? And we said, well, there are FCC Class 1 license. It's the same camera that's used in the Xbox on aisle 37 in your store. And they said, well, that's fine, but do you have clearance that 20 of them work? And we said, well, we're not using 20, we're using 1 at a time for a split second, cumulatively 4 seconds, not like your kid who's in there for hours at a time. And they said, that may be the best explanation we've ever heard. Can you give us indication of FDA clearance of 20 of them? So I don't really, so in the images, I can bring up pictures. It's very simple what we're doing. We're now in the process of now that we have a training set of 6,000 bodies with 20 lasers, we're now reducing that to 1 camera The exercise with Michelle's people was spectacular because we really didn't know what we didn't know until her people decided to come through us like a roto-rooter and really.
That was a graphic that we didn't need.
And you too can sign up for the FDA Roto-Rooter service.
Roto-Rooter is a plumbing thing, Joe. I don't know what you were thinking.
No, I'm a man of a certain age and I can sing you the little jingle, but as Michelle's marketer, I'm going to respectfully decline that as a new tagline for her.
But I did say it was an exquisite experience, and we learned an awful lot about what we were doing by documenting what we were doing through Michelle's program. And now as we're meeting with higher levels of sophisticated investors, having those files done and completed this way, hopefully will prove, accomplish goals that we did not even intend.
Michelle, I definitely want to give you the floor, but first, Jen, he's talking about, as I understand it, a diagnostic tool that's taking in a measurement. Is your field relevant here? I mean, what alternative would I need?
Yeah, so in that particular case, it's not so much about experience like that. We're not talking about like, we're not making a causal
Does it
claim.
work?
Lee's not saying like that my cameras cause something, right? What Lee is saying is that my cameras have the ability, the sensitivity and the specificity to measure. So there we're talking more about like measurement validity, which is absolutely relevant to all of our fields, but it's different than making a causal claim. In order to make a causal claim, people need Lee's device to be valid and well designed. But in order to
I think Leah's commandeered this session. Do I need to put it back in the gallery, Lee?
No, I didn't know that it was turning on. Okay, it's off.
Anyway, yeah, so in order to make so it's relevant to making a causal claim because you can't feel good about A causing B unless you have something like what Lee designs and that it's a solid way of measuring your outcome or your predictor.
So we're talking about causal today, not relevant for that, but as a scientist, if he were to engage you, for example, I know you are quite busy, but if he were to, what kind of, hey, I'm a scientist and did you think of this, this and that? What if anything would be relevant from your field that you would say, did you look at it this way?
Well, when it comes to measurements of like the body, really then we're going to be interested in things like sort of like the predictive value and things related to something called like criterion validity. And discriminant validity. So basically, are you measuring what you say you're measuring? And can you show me that you are not also measuring something related? Like are we really measuring? And I don't know what Lee is specifically measuring, but really my question,
everything, apparently.
Everything. Yeah. My question would be like, are you measuring this thing or these things, and how well are you measuring them?
Well, it's interesting because people do like to wear some level of clothing. So you are also measuring what the effect that the clothing may be having, and different clothing may be sitting on different bodies differently. Yep. We did go through our training set and found that we had a problem that we had not anticipated, which were those people who decided to just drop their pants to their ankles and get scanned. And all of a sudden we were having all this like bunching up at the feet. And we couldn't quite figure out what it was. And we realized it was people's pants.
Oh, that's good.
That's definitely.
You discovered a whole new medical condition and deformity.
Michelle, so if I understood his anecdote, Lee is saying that, okay, I'm really glad that one of your cameras works and they each work individually. So now can you prove to FDA that 20 of them work? I mean, I don't even understand.
It wasn't that 20 of them worked. It was they were concerned about, because it was an FCC class 1 laser, which is permitted, whether 20 of them put out so much radiation that it would now be a different device. And we said, no, it's only one at a time. And their lawyer from a really big firm for a really, really big box store said, that's great. That's a great answer. Prove to me that 20 of them is acceptable, even though you're not doing 20 of them. And that wasn't even the FDA. That was just the lawyer who was anticipating that the FDA may challenge their client for putting something
So
in that wasn't.
in your position, do you then have to answer that question, or do you say, okay, I heard your question, but it's not relevant because it never happens?
Well, the answer is absolutely, Joe. And we had big law firms and they had big law firms. And by the time we got done, the only thing I had was big bills. But, because there was no way to answer that question. It was like the answer is we didn't have all the documentation that Michelle caused us to put together to then go in to get that guidance. And so that's one of the reasons why I capitulated and decided, okay, I'm told by lawyers, I've got opinion letters from Morrison and Forrester, I've got opinion letters from Epstein, Becker, Green, all these fancy FDA specialists telling me I don't need FDA. And then I had a customer who was saying, that's wonderful, show me the FDA. So it doesn't matter how I argue it, how I presented it, all I got was more bills.
Well, and he was in such a tricky place because you can't just, because a customer wants it, just turn in a 510K or de novo. It has to, first off, clearly meet the definition of a medical device. And then then the FDA has something they call their product code structure, which is how they have already predefined and regulated devices. Well, his first set of claims and indications was exempt from 510K. They did require design controls. So what we've done is put a regulatory structure in around the current kind of indications. And then as he's building his training set and learning data and growing the claims and indications and capability of his device, we have a strategy that will grow into something that the FDA does have oversight and jurisdiction, and not a current product code that already says this is for this type of submission or no submission at all. So we'll be going into a de novo because there's nothing else that exists that does what he does in the way he does it.
Thank you. We're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to thank you both, Lee and Michelle, and we're going to get back to Jen and wrap up soon. What I'd like to request from you, Jen, is you teach this course on the 12 things. Perhaps you have a slide deck or something that you can forward to me afterward, and I can make it available to the folks who tuned in, because I'm intrigued to know what they are.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. Yeah, I'll send it to you after I get off the call here.
Closing thoughts?
Thank you for having me. I was confident that this was going to be the most uncomfortable talk that I've ever given, because I do nothing with medical devices. And I'm like excited to get some names of folks who were here. Joe, I'm going to be poking you.
Actually, Verna's already written me privately and said I have to get in touch with her, and I think she wants you to guest lecture or something.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's actually it's really exciting to me to get to talk about, to get to like the translation between like what I do in a very like in my world of psychology, and then what's like actually going on in the real world and how relevant it all is. Yeah, this was really fun. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.